Hi, I'm Len Epp from LeanPub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Daniel Godoy. Based in Berlin, Daniel is a data scientist, developer, teacher, and writer who has been working for over 20 years in a range of industries and sectors, including banking, government, and retail, amongst others. In recent years, he has also been teaching machine learning and distributed computing technologies at Data Science Retreat, the longest-running Berlin-based bootcamp on the subject. You can read Daniel's popular posts at dvgodoy.medium.com and Towards Data Science at towardsdatascience.com. You can follow him on Twitter at dvgodoy and check out his profile on LinkedIn. Daniel is the author of the LeanPub book, Deep Learning with PyTorch Step by Step, A Beginner's Guide. In the book, Daniel uses a conversational and first principle approach to help beginners interested in learning about deep learning and PyTorch, a tool used to make it easier to build models in the Python programming language. In this interview, we're going to talk about Daniel's background and career, professional interests, his book, and at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience as a self-published book author. So thank you very much, Daniel, for being on the LeanPub Front Matter podcast.
Thank you for having me here, and thanks for the nice introduction.
Thanks. I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you made your way into your career.
I was born in Rio, so I guess everyone knows Rio. But when I was very, very young, 4 years old or so, my parents moved to Porto Alegre, a city in the south of Brazil. I lived there until 2015, so most of my life. And I started, when I was very young, I started coding, programming already. So this is something that is with me since I was 8 years old. So my first computer was even younger than that. In 1982, my father bought a computer. So I started copying code from the basic language to the computer and running the stuff. So that's something that has been with me all my life. Then I did a degree in computer science, still in Porto Alegre. After that, I worked for a little bit over 10 years as a software developer in a small company, also in Porto Alegre, that I used to develop banking systems for financial institutions, credit, leasing, all these kind of things. I always had some taste for the financial sector. This is something that always got my interest. So that was a very nice fit. But then at some point, I was not so happy with being in the same place for 10 years. I kind of got tired of that. And then I tried something completely different. I got a government job in Brazil. This is very popular there because you get a nice pay slip. It's very chill most of the time. So I started working for the Secretary of Finance for the Treasury part in south of Brazil. It was a completely different world, right? So I was not coding or programming so much anymore. I still doing some of that to help improve the process and stuff in the job. But most of the thing was about making financial projections for revenue to debt ratios for the state, this kind of things. And the funny thing is that at some point, it was 2012, sometimes it's like, the butterfly effect thing. I really like to think that some of the stuff that happens to you in life is it's a moment that someone assuming something that's so simple but ends up having a major impact on everything. So I remember I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine and we were like, okay, we are analyzing this kind of now. If for people that are not familiar with it, it's kind of boring. The debt to revenue ratios and stuff. And they was like, why is our state lagging so much behind the others? Why is the state we're used to live in so bad in terms of that? And then we started making hypotheses and, trying to figure out what happened and simulations with that. And then it really caught my interest because I was like, okay, well, maybe I can try to simulate what happened, right? And to make a projection, a forecast based on that. And we got something going on. And then a colleague of mine that was sitting there, he said, no, maybe you should write a paper on that. And then I wrote a paper on that, using stochastic simulation to make these forecasts. And I submitted this paper to an award. There is this National Treasury Award in Brazil. And I won that. I never thought I would have won that. I was like, okay, yeah, I wrote something that was cool. I submitted. Maybe someone can acknowledge that. And there was all this fuzz about it. The people from one of the major newspaper in Brazil got in touch. They made an article based on the results and all stuff. And that was a life-changing moment, because at that moment, okay, yeah, I like analyzing data, So that was, I can pinpoint that was the starting point of my career as a data scientist. That was like, okay, I want to do that. And then I started investing a little bit more. I wrote more things for this regarding the public sector in Brazil, analyzing other things like efficiency and other topics. But then again, after 5 or 6 years, I was like, okay, there is nothing much left for me to do here. And then I wanted to do something different again. And I wanted to invest more in the data science career. And my wife always wanted to move abroad. She wanted to be a diplomat. She wanted to work, the embassy and stuff. But I mean, she was not. She was doing something else. And then we're like, okay, maybe we can try to go to Europe to see what we can do there. And that's when I found this data science retreat, this boot camp in Berlin that you also mentioned in the introduction. I applied to it. They selected me for the boot camp, and then in the end of 2015, we moved there. We got an unpaid leave from a job, because I did not know if this was going to work or not, right? It's a major change. But then 3 months passed. I graduated from the program. I managed to get a job in Berlin with a small fintech. And then things started happening. After a year or so, they invited me to teach there. That was something that was also kind of out of the blue, I always liked the explaining concepts to, trying to figure out how things work. This is something that I was always interested in doing. But then I was like, okay, they're teaching to a bunch of students that were also like me, trying to get their career started in data science. And that was very nice, because then I found out that, okay, not only I like data science, but I also like teaching. And then from there, I changed jobs a couple of times since then. But I've been teaching in the data science retreat from 2016 until beginning of 2020. Then with the pandemic, everything changed, right? Because it was an on-site program, so it would make sense to go there and they'll interact with your colleagues and you develop projects. And all of a sudden, okay, yeah, freeze everything now. Yeah, everyone is on lockdown. And then, I mean, as everything in life, there is good and bad things bad side to everything, right? And in that case, the lockdown gave me the chance to start writing the book. So that's when this started. In March 2020, I had the idea, but you never started doing it. Yeah, tomorrow I'm going to do that. Yeah, tomorrow I'm going to do that. And then, okay, and now I'm stuck at home. I don't have anything else to do. Okay, maybe now it's time to start writing this. And that's when I started the book. And it was a long book, I didn't keep track of everything, but maybe I spent like 1,000 hours or so writing that. It was huge.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that great story. There's so many parts to it, and we'll get to talking specifically about your book and what it's about, and then the process of writing it and what got the ball rolling there as well. And thanks for talking a little bit about how how the pandemic sort of gave you the time or the opportunity to do it. That's actually, it's funny, in the publishing industry generally that was sort of true, and a lot of sort of conventional publishers were like, enough. We've had enough manuscripts submitted to us, and they always get more than they want anyway. But actually on this podcast and on LeanPub, we've had quite a few guests and, quite a few authors generally who've had, a similar thing. I mean, including, I think one story was a guy's friend was going to be in quarantine for 2 weeks. So he's like, let me help you edit your book. And the guy was like, well, no, then I better get started writing it, So, and there's, I've had another guest who I think went to visit his parents and then got stuck because of a sudden lockdown in, I think, northern Italy. And he's like, well, time to write my book. So we've had a few guests who've had a similar experience like that. But just going back to the beginning of your story. So your dad got a computer and you were sort of figuring out how to code on that and stuff. And then you did a computer science degree in the mid 90s. One question that comes up often on this podcast or in some form or another is, if you were starting out now, you were 18 years old, say, and you were intending to have a career that was some technology related, computers related, would you get a formal university degree in computer science, or would you choose another path given all the changes and all the new tools and resources that are available now?
I think that formal degree is still important to some extent, even though you can get lots of things from the internet for free. I would say that the biggest challenge is to organize yourself and stick to a schedule, right? Because I think one of the facts that you have, like if you're enrolled in a course and you're in an institution, and even if you're paying, in Brazil, for instance, I was attending a public university, so it was free. But still, right, you have a commitment, and then you have to go there. So I think that helps. Organizing, someone have put a lot of thought into organizing the content and seeing how it fits better. Of course, it's always going to be at a slower pace than what you'll get yourself if you're doing stuff online, right? But I would stick with the formal education still, yes.
I'm speaking of formal education. So you got your computer science degree and you worked, I believe, as a programmer in banking for a while, but then you made the shift to the Department of the Treasury for the government. And I can see from your LinkedIn profile here that you got a bachelor's degree in economics later on in life and a master's and an MBA as well. And I'm curious, did your computer science education help you when you were suddenly being given problems in finance, like I don't know, interest coverage ratios, or as you were saying, sort of, interest to debt ratios or debt to income ratios and stuff like that. Did having a computer science background help you sort of face those challenges?
Once you know how to code, then you can solve pretty much anything, right? That's funny because especially in the government, there was lots of things that were like doing in a suboptimal way because everyone knows how to use Excel, but not everyone knows how to use Excel properly, right? So a couple of VBA macros, even some people will say, yeah, this is not a real coding. I mean, okay, I'm not into that discussion, but even some coding in something very simple as a VBA macro already helps and makes processes much more efficient. So yeah, definitely. I think that knowing how to code and knowing properly, also algorithms, right? Because one thing that I remember learning in college, it was like, okay, how do you graph theory? It was so abstract when I got this in 1995. What am I going to use that for? But then at some point later in life, okay, maybe you can use these. There are things in real life that you can use stuff like that for. So that's why one of the reasons why I also stand for the formal education. Because maybe if you're doing a curriculum for yourself, you're like, oh yeah, nowadays, not so much for graph theory, but there is always some topic that you may neglect because you don't think that's important, because you don't know that may be important, right? But going back to the original question, definitely, I think that knowing, having a degree in computer science and knowing how to code really helps with everything.
Yeah, I know. It's funny. I'm not going to talk about myself too much, but I had a kind of funny sort of backwards experience from yours where I went into investment banking and I had to do financial modeling. It was a lot of time in Excel, and I didn't realize that I was coding. Like I had no idea that I was basically doing like functional programming or something like that, right? I mean, you'd have way more stories than me, but I remember I had no idea what a VBA macro was until some guys from one of the big 5 accounting firms gave us a spreadsheet that had hidden sheets in it that were locked. And I was so angry that they would do that, right? Because it's like, and I don't know, for anyone who's worked with Excel a lot, like, there's sort of conventions when you're passing files around, right? One is either you give someone the output or you give them the whole thing. But to give them the output with the calculations hidden in the same spreadsheet is just offensive. And so I found a VBA macro that I could use to crack the password protection in Excel to get those hidden sheets. And it didn't really it actually did help a lot, sort of understanding what was really going on. I wasn't like sort of finding out any real secrets. It was just sort of rude on my counterparty's part to sort of hide that. But yes, like it is, a lot of people who work in finance will know how to use Excel, but if you actually really push and learn, to get to another level, then you can, it's not just that now you're faster or something. There's all kinds of things you can do. And it can actually be just inherently like enjoyable. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. There's some people just love spreadsheets and what you can do with them. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit. So a lot of our guests, I think there's something about self-publishing being sort of independent. And a lot of our guests are people who've moved around a fair amount. Not that that's so unusual nowadays, or even in many times in the past, but what was it like for you moving from Brazil to Berlin, to Germany?
That was something, right? For us, because we had to pack everything that we could and move to a different country in 40 days. Getting all your affairs in order to move to a different place, all the legal stuff, that was like insane. And fitting everything that not everything that but actually everything that you want to keep into 5 or 6 large bags, that's very challenging. I kind of cheated on that. I still have like a lot of stuff in the storage unit in Brazil because okay, I cannot handle that, but they are still there. So I have to solve this at some point. But apart from these practicalities, right, there is a lot of different things when you compare Brazil and Germany. And I think in 2 different cultures, right? I was a bit surprised because, in Brazil we have, at least I had some ideas, right, that I expected to be more similar, to be honest. I was a bit surprised that many different small things sometimes are different. You're like, okay, whoa, how does that work? But of course, there are the good and the bad side. One specifically for the good side is that one major problems in Brazil that everyone knows is violence, right? So we have criminality is like off the charts, and this is something that you grow up in, and then you learn to be aware of your surroundings, and paying attention to if you go in of the car or get out of the car. And this is something that like 3 months in Germany, we're like, oh, we feel lighter now. What's happening? Because you don't have to look over your shoulder. You can get your phone and not worry about being someone trying to snatch your phone and running away. So that was very liberating. That was really a really good sensation that most people take for granted, right? When I was discussing this with the people in Germany, and not only Germans, but the Spaniards, Portuguese people, Ukrainians, everyone else. And then you say, this is so cool. You don't have to worry about this. You're like, what do you mean? And then I tell them how reality is in a South American country. And they're like, oh, really? So that was one of the key differences. And then, of course, you have all these small differences, right? One thing that I miss the most is the food. Because Brazilian food, especially where I come from, you go to these all-you-can-eat buffet. So you may eat stuff your face with food, and barbecues all over the place. And this is not, you can find that in Germany or in Europe for that matter. So yeah, but trade-offs, right? So life is about trade-offs. In that case, I got a different career. That's I don't know if I would be a published author, a self-published author, if I hadn't moved to Europe, because the kind of connections, the kind of people that you get to know in Europe is so different. Because in Brazil, we don't have foreigners, right? So you don't have these exchange, these opportunities. It's very local. And there, I get in touch with many people from all over the world, especially teaching a data science retreat, which I think it was one of the best things that I've done, taking this job as teacher. Because I got like 150 or so students from all over the world, different experiences. And that is so nice because you have this network, you exchange ideas, you make referrals for other jobs, right? So it's also nicer to find a new job if you have this network. So.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I've got a question about your sort of when your move into data science specifically and how that happened. But I can't help but there's some joke in there about the difference between a currywurst stand and a Brazilian steakhouse. But it's funny what you say about moving somewhere and sort of the thing you realize that there's something that's not there that is where you're from, but you never really thought about it until it was not there anymore. And I remember when I moved from Saskatchewan, this province in Canada, to London, not that outside bars there was a lot of violence, but if you were a guy and you were at the bar, the possibility of a bar fight was just always, it's just a punchy place, right? And so, I remember some people asking me like, "Oh, don't you feel kind of intimidated by being in the big city?" And I'm like, "No, like I've never felt safer, at least in bars, than I did in London, because it's just that there's at least in the parts of London that I sort of normally went to, not all though, but punch ups just weren't really a thing. But anyway, on that note, so eventually you found yourself, in Germany, and you were doing data science. Had you been doing data science before you started teaching, I imagine?
That was about this paper that I wrote with the simulation. So it was not data science as we know today. It was some sort of, on the way on towards data science, like the Medium publication. Because I was doing like stochastic simulation for these treasury indicators and stuff, but I was using MATLAB back then. So I was not doing data science using Python as everyone does today, as I'm doing today. But it was very useful in the sense that I was doing the vectorization, like making everything vectorize the operations. It's something that I struggle a bit to learn while using MATLAB, but once you learn it, that's awesome, right? Because now you can just use this in NumPy and everything else works the same. So I think really struggling to understand this in MATLAB and performing this stochastic simulation for writing that paper really helped me with the foundations for the stuff that would come after, right?
Just for anyone listening, let's say, can you maybe tell us what a stochastic simulation is?
So basically what happens is that the forecast that we had that was being done before, it would assume that there was a growth rate of 3% a year, something like that. It could be true on average, but the thing is, of course, one year the revenue would grow 5%. The other year it would go down 1%. You never know. Basically, what I did there was, instead of assuming this linear growth, I would randomize between -3 and +3%. It depends on the parameter of the simulation, but you just draw from a normal distribution these values, and I would assume those, draw samples from one scenario and compute how much it would lead me to. And then again, and then again, and then again. So I would do this 10,000 times. Basically, as if there were 10,000 parallel universes where different things happen, right? Then if I would go to visit all these 10,000 universes, and then I would average them out, what would be my result? And not only the average, but you can also get if I want to get the 80% of these universes, how much does it? What's the range that I can find this? Whatever indicator that I was trying to simulate. So basically, it's just randomly sampling values that you can use for something, for in this case, forecast an indicator, and doing this a lot of times to have an idea of how much it can the I hope you'll.
Yes. That's very good. Including the idea that you iterate and you do lots of them, right? It's not just one simulation, as it were. I guess I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball question here, but words like data and simulation come up, and in particularly data science, and when computers are involved, people often just assume that what they're shown, especially if it's charts and numbers are involved, is true. Often this has come up a few times on, in discussions on this podcast, where it's like if you're on the analysis side, you present to people who are not familiar with the way the analysis works, and they often feel like you've presented them with the truth. This is the way it's going to go in the next year or the next 5 years or something like that. And I guess my curveball question for you then is economics a science?
Yeah, okay. That's a tricky question because can I not answer that question? No, I'm kidding.
You can opt out. That's for sure.
No, I know, but that's tricky, right? I think that it is a science in a sense that you can. If you what does it mean to be a science, right? You have organized knowledge, and then you have hypotheses, assumptions to try to make predictions and stuff, right? What I don't agree with are some of the assumptions that are made in economics. Of course, you have the different schools of thought, and everyone has different assumptions, and some of those are simply not realistic, right? And for instance, one is ergodicity. Basically, does it mean if you have the expected value? Let's say that you make a bet, right? So I propose to you a bet, and I tell you, okay, here's the thing: either you get $100 million, or if you lose, you have to give me $1 million. I'm assuming that you don't have $1 million for the sake of this, right? Then. Depending on the probability of winning or losing this, you may say the expected value of this bet is like positive, so you should take the bet. Let's say that for the sake of that 90% of the time you would lose, and 10% of the time you get this 100 million. The thing is, if you were able to live 100 different lives and make this bet 100 in multiple universes, right? If you would be able to bet all these, the average you over all these universes would have a positive value. You would be profiting. But you are only one. You cannot connect or talk to the other yous in the multiple universes. So if you lose and you don't have $1 million, now you're in a bad shape, right? Not say a curse word here. And then, but this is the assumption that you have ergodicity that you can just do over. There is no do over in life. So how can you make this an assumption of your model, right? So for me, this is the problem that I see with this. And I know that if people would challenge this, and people would not agree with that, what I'm saying here, but that's just my opinion on the topic, right? But for sure, there are many different opinions on that.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that very specific opinion. It's one I'm not a trained economist, but it's one I share very, very much. Particularly, I think it's when people have when they're in areas like, let's say, psychology or economics, and there may be professors and they write papers and they teach at universities and things like that, they can often trick themselves into a kind of intellectual chauvinism where they think it's really straightforward what reason is, for example, what the rational thing is to do, or what is in a person's interests to do, right? But what counts as rational is actually outside the realm of economics. That's philosophy and ethics. Even what counts as in your interests is a question for philosophers and ethicists, and not for economics or for psychology. And so, one of my favorite examples of the kind of thing you're talking about. So people set up these little scenarios, and then this is why I use the word chauvinism. They sort of proceed as though it's really obvious what the right answer is, and it's like, I'm sure you've heard the one where I always forget the name of it because I just don't have any respect for it. But the scenario where it's like, okay, there's you and this other person, right? And you can either choose to have that person get $99 and you get $1, or neither of you gets anything. Well, the rational thing is to take the $1 and let the other person get the 99, because 1 is more than 0. And it's like, that only follows if there's an unstated fact of this scenario, which is counterintuitive, which is that value is absolute rather than relative, which is not how money works, right? A scenario in which me and this other person are, with respect to everything else, equal, and now he has relatively more of something than I do, is actually worse for me. It's not better. If you see what I mean, right? And you have to add the extra thing, and with the way in this crazy universe, money has absolute rather than relative value. What does that even mean? It's not clear, but you can't. I don't know, you just sometimes can't get through to people when they're behind this kind of wall. And that's one of the reasons I asked the question, sort of leading question about it was economics as science, because often people use the status of economics as a science to kind of get away with not really thinking through some of the deeper philosophical questions that they just take for granted, like what's rational or what's in a person's interest.
Yeah, so what you're describing is called the ultimatum game. So basically it is exactly, you would rather be, they say that would rather be with more money than less money. But I think it's not only about the relative versus absolute, but a measure of fairness. So what this plays it with your judgment on what's fair, what's not. So do you think it's fair? The other guy have 99 and you have only one. So they have experiments with that, and they say, okay, as long as the I don't remember now. I read about this, but it's been a long time. I think if you have 1/3 and the other person has 2/3, that's acceptable for most people. But if it gets more skewed than that, then it's a no-go. Of course, it changes, right? But the idea is that it's not. The outcome is not fair, and therefore it doesn't matter if you get more money with that, because if you think that it's unfair, then of course you'll say, okay, whatever, I don't mind losing the money as long as I can prove that let the other person know that was not fair. What I don't know is that, of course, these experiments, they're always made with like tiny amounts of money, right? So you get like $1 or $10 or something like that. I would wonder what would happen if like someone would do an experiment with that to like life-changing amount of money. So let's say that I give you 100,000 and the other guy has 5 million. Would you take it or not? I think that changes a lot, right? Because even if you think, okay, that's unfair as hell, but I mean, that's 100,000. I mean, anyone can use 100,000, right? So I don't know how, probably we'll never know the answer to that, right? Unless one of the billionaires decides to investigate psychological aspects of these things. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Both of your examples, it sounds like you have a kind of an existentialist's approach to economics, which is really, really fascinating. But yes, thank you very much for going down this path. I was sort of excited to get the chance to ask you that question, but I wasn't sure you'd be up for it. That's so great. And so you started teaching, and you also started writing blog posts and things like that. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that got started for you.
It's also a bit funny. I was like at some point, I think it was 2017 or so, I thought, okay, what if I try to teach a course myself? The initial idea was to teach in Portuguese. Because I thought, okay, this is a market that's not like covered by anyone. Data Science Retreat is in English. You have lots of competitors in English, but in Portuguese, there is almost nothing. So okay, maybe I can do that. And I started organizing the course. And then I was talking to a friend, and he was like, okay, cool, I know you, that's fine, but who the hell are you? So he said, okay, you no one knows you. Why would anyone give you any money to teach something? Because what are your qualifications, right? Of course, I was already working as a data scientist, but still. And then, okay, I have to get known. How do I do that? I don't care. So maybe I should start writing something. That's how the first blog post came to be, because I'm okay, I'm going to write something and publish it, right? What there is only upside to that. So I got to this topic that I really liked, the activation functions in deep learning, because they do all these really nice they twist and turn the feature space. So that's very technical now, but they really produce some nice animations that you can visualize what's happening. I read a blog post from other guy that was very nice, but way over my head, extremely technical, lots of equations and stuff. And I wanted to do something simpler. So I could understand it better, and I could show people that. And that was like the guy from Towards Data Science was really happy with the post, and he was featured first in the publication, at the front of the page. So I got 2,000 views on the first day. It was super excited, refreshing like crazy. 1,800, 1,900, 2,000, yay! So it was a very nice feeling having 2,000 people reading what I wrote. And then I wrote some more until at some point I wrote one about PyTorch. That was the one that eventually led to the book. So that's, that started in a way that I would not anticipate going in that direction, right?
And that post, I think, got something like 280,000 views or something like that.
The first one, the most popular one is about binary cross entropy. It has almost 500,000 now.
Wow.
Views. And the other day I realized I Googled myself in the Google Scholar, and I got 35 citations on that blog post, which is like, no, I also never thought of that. But there is a lot of citations on this blog post. So yeah, that was really great.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, of course, that must be an amazing experience, but also really good motivation to write a book on that when you know that you've got an audience out there already. On that note, so the book is Deep Learning with PyTorch, Step by Step, a Beginner's Guide. It's a very big book, as you mentioned, all the time you spent working on it. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what deep learning is and what PyTorch is.
So basically, you have machine learning, right? Which is what you have traditional algorithms like linear regression, logistic regression, random forest, and then you have deep learning, which is based on neural networks. Neural networks were not so popular until 2014 or so, but then when I was a student at Data Science Retreat in 2015, there were already some developments. So some of my colleagues, they used those neural networks in their projects, but it was very primitive in a way that you do not have access to GPUs. That's a combination of different things that enable deep learning to be a thing as it is today. One is the availability of data, because these are very data-hungry models. You have to have like thousands or sometimes millions of data points or images or something to train those models, and you need a lot of computational power. So GPUs and all this is something that was not so widespread 5-7 years ago. So the combination of these two things allowed all the deep learning to flourish. And then, of course, you have the big players, right? They have a major impact. So you have like Google, have Facebook. What they do, they do their own models, and then once they train those, they release those to the public. So they have like the pre-trained models that you can use for something yourself. Because it's not like you and I or someone is going to train like a huge model like that on their own. Because that if you try that on the cloud, you'll be off by thousands of dollars. And so that would not be so easy. So pretty much everything relies on these pre-trained models, because you can use them as base. Someone else already did the hard work, and now you just have to make a small adjustments. Then you may have an application that detects like the famous cats and dogs. The other day I read about this application that this person, she was detecting if a cat was happy or not. And then you see, okay, that seems silly, right? If you just look at that, happy or not, why would the cat be unhappy? Turns out that when the cat was unhappy, it was actually sick. So these applications were able to detect early signs of sickness in cats. So, one was dehydrated, the other had some other problem. And then these people took the cats that were not happy and took them to the vet, and then they were able to treat early. So that was really cool, right? What I did not know, what I was curious to know, is like, where did she get the unhappy cats pictures from, right? Because you need the pictures from the unhappy cats to train a model. So that information I couldn't find. But so, this is the kind of thing that you can do. And you do that based on these other models that were already pre-trained by one of the big players. So that's deep learning, right, in general. And PyTorch is a framework that you can use to actually handle those models, train them or use them to make these predictions about the cat being happy or not. PyTorch itself was developed by Facebook. So that's been since 2016. And there are two major competing frameworks, TensorFlow, which came first from Google, and PyTorch. I like PyTorch better. I mean, of course, I'm biased, right? Because I wrote a whole book about it. But I like it because, I don't know, it's kind of fun to use. If you are a Python programmer and you know how to handle Python, it feels so easy and so natural to go through coding using PyTorch. And this is what I was trying to convey in the book and also first in the blog post. I actually had a good time learning PyTorch at the beginning because, I don't know, it just feels natural.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that. And of course, we'll have links to the blog post that we mentioned and everything else in here as well, so you can get also get a sense of Daniel's conversational and fun, very fun style, which you can also see even in the about the book description on the landing page on LeanPub for the book. It's interesting, yeah. So that there's these sort of like there's all these big players like Google and Facebook making competing things, but that they're also releasing trained kind of models or data sets to other people to use. The idea of, I mean, we all know the ones, is this a cat? Or probably most people who pay attention to some of this stuff in the press will know about, giving one of these models a set of pictures, some of which are cats, and then what it does is it sort of runs sort of various algorithms and learns to sort of like get identify which images are cats. And so it can run some simulation or some effort to identify what are cats, and it can check it against, well, how many of my guesses were correct and how many were false, and blah blah blah, and then it can iterate and it can get better, but basically what the algorithms are doing is looking for correlations in the data, generally speaking, if I understand it correctly. And is that I mean, I'm sure that's a big oversimplification.
It's not so much as correlations, but I mean, this is tricky to explain, especially if you don't have like a way to show people what's happening. But basically what happens is that you map, in this case, an image, for instance, right, or the feature that you're using in the model into a gigantic dimensional space, right? Because you have like two-dimensional, three-dimensional that we can see and plot nicely, and they have four-dimensional, which just start getting weird. And then there is this joke that say, okay, how do you imagine something in 14 dimensions? You just close your eyes, say 14 really loud, and then you go. Sorry. That's silly. But then when you talk about deep learning models, they have like millions and millions of parameters, so that would be millions of dimensions. So that's impossible to visualize or to even understand what's going on in a visual way. But the idea is that all these instances, these images, let's say that you're doing cats happy or unhappy, like I was saying, right? What will happen is that the happy cats, they will be mapped into a region of this crazy dimensional space, and the unhappy cats would be mapped to a different region. So now if you were saying like this would be like three-dimensional, right? You have like a ball, right? And then you see on the left side of your ball, there are the happy cats. On the right side of the right hemisphere of the ball, there are the unhappy cats. And then maybe if you get really well-trained model and it's easy enough, you can get and cut the ball in half, and you have happy cats on one side, unhappy on the other. So that's an oversimplification, right? But the idea is that you're going to separate them. So it's not so much about correlation, but about mapping into these multi-dimensional spaces. Yeah, thanks. It's weird. Just describing it is a feel weird. If I can draw this like I do to the students, it helps. Yeah, no, but I mean, I've got to say, I really love personally weird descriptions of things, because they remind you that you even though you may be like me, you've read a lot of articles about this kind of thing, you really don't understand it, and just giving you a sense that there's this sort of what to you is a mystery. There's something solid behind it, but it has to be presented to you as a mystery because you don't understand it. It's interesting too, because of course, other things that people will be familiar with the news about these kinds of models is sometimes they can make mistakes. For example, they can identify people of a certain race as being more likely to do X, Y, and Z for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with race whatsoever. But if there's basically bad data, basically, you can get bad results, and so you have to be careful about that. But another very interesting and in its own way kind of controversial application is self-driving vehicles. And I know that for example, Tesla uses PyTorch. And in this case, it's not happy cat or sad cat. It's like cyclist or street sign. I was generally speaking, what's your sense of where technologies like that are going to be in, say, 5 years? And again, that's a total curveball kind of question, but. Yeah, that's tricky, right? I mean, the self-driving, That's interesting. That's like nice to think in theoretical terms, but it's delayed. Yeah, because if you read like news from 2016, they will say, yeah, in 2019 we're gonna have like full self-driving cars doing everything. And then we're like, okay, 3 years past that already, and some of the companies are like not doing that anymore. I mean, Tesla is still doing, but it's a hard problem, right? And then technically speaking, I find this challenging and interesting. But from the practical point of view, I wonder if that's wise, because I remember maybe 10 years ago or so, before deep learning and all computer vision became so widespread, the talk about self-driving car was not about a smart car, but about a smart road. You remember this Minority Report or iRobot movies? The cars were like, evenly spaced on the road, and they were being driven by the sensors or whatever in the road that they would like move really fast because everything was in place. Because at the end of the day, the traffic, that's a controlling problem, right? You have to have, if you had some central authority handling traffic, or in that case, something controlling traffic, it would be optimal, right? The problem is that you have like multiple agents competing, and then in that sense, if you have one guy trying to drive at 200 kilometers per hour and the other guy driving at 60 kilometers per hour, you have a self-driving car in the middle of it trying to figure out these very different profiles of drivers and trucks and whatever, right? And then all of a sudden there is a pedestrian going, crossing where he or she shouldn't be crossing. So there are so many challenges for that, and I understand the appeal from the technical point of view, because come on, like every programmer loves a challenge. If it's something really hard and it's a puzzle, yeah, let me try to solve it. But I wonder if there would be a different and easier way. On the other hand, if you think of that how would you implement something like a smart road? You need like all the cars to be compatible with that road, which is a challenge in itself, right? And then you have to have the government or the private sector doing this renovation of the road so it's possible. So this will not happen anytime soon. On the other hand, the self-driving car, if you put effort enough yourself, you may try to have it done or on the road before that. You don't have to agree with anyone else in that sense. So pros and cons, like I said, everything else there is a trade-off. So.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for sharing that. That's such a fascinating concept that we could talk about for hours, I'm sure. But often it is true though that if to a hammer everything looks like a nail, right? And if you're a programmer, you're kind of like, oh, let's and you're into technology, like computing technology, you're like, let's use this. But when it comes to smart roads, for example, here's an example of smart roads. They're all one way. Right. All of a sudden, self-driving just advanced 10 years, if roads are all one way or if they're all one lane or something like that, you know what I mean? That those kinds of things could make a huge difference. And it does seem to me that often this is a sort of ordinary observation, but, when new technologies come around, we try and replicate the old way of doing things with the new technology instead of thinking about a new way of doing things, right? And so, the sort of conventional self-driving car that people are thinking of is like, oh, it's just like mine. It can do anything it wants, and it can go anywhere doing anything it wants and making decisions all the time. And it's like, that might not be, there's a million people a year who die because we have that way of driving as a default mode, that just anybody can get in their car and go anywhere and do anything. And my personal view is on that note is that if and when the day comes that people don't own their cars anymore, that's when standardization starts to happen of the kind that you were describing as a potential thing. When you don't own your car anymore, then you don't care about all its features or what its color is or something like that potentially. And so all of a sudden the opportunities for standardization come in, and then we could see a lot of movement on that area. But yeah, thanks very much for sharing those thoughts. This personal interest of mine. It's great to hear an expert like you in these technologies talk about it. Moving on to the last part of the interview where we talk about the process of writing your book and things like that. So it's a very big book. You said you spent many hours on it, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your approach to it as a writer. I mean, you mentioned earlier when you're talking about university degrees, discipline and plans and things like that. Did you say to yourself, okay, or did you work out after a while? I'm going to get up at 4 a.m. and write for 3 hours every day. Did you have a system like that you used to work on the book?
That's one of the reasons that I mentioned that having a schedule or something that's important when you're like attending an institution is because I know myself, I'm not that good at doing it myself. So I had the rough idea of what I would like to accomplish with the book when I started. I know that the blog posts were like the baseline, right? With the initial building block of that. But I was very optimistic. Yeah, I'm going to write this like 3 months from now, it's going to be over. It took like 11 months or so. So I was way off in the initial planning. But also, I didn't want to make that like job, So I didn't want to set a deadline for myself, or I wanted to, because these parts, sometimes programming, coding, or in that sense also writing is like a creative process. Right? It's less than a job or a task that needs to be done and more of a creative process. So I would I wanted to let it flow. Basically, I started writing. I had some idea what I wanted to do that, but I was not sticking to anything very strict. So I started writing, and then there would be good days and bad days. Some days I started writing, I would 4,000 words in a single day, because it was really going, The other days was okay, I don't feel like writing, but then I would still try to force a little bit to write at least 200 words or so, even if I had to review it the next day, to not let it, because if you procrastinate too much, then you end up not doing it. So I was trying to keep at least some of the rhythm. But one of the important part was to get all the code, since this was a book about PyTorch and code is the major part of it, was to get all the code working and organized first. So I had all these big notebooks with lots of code on it. And then once, I'm happy with the code, and then I started telling the story that was in my mind. And then I started writing, and at some point, this is not working the way that I'm telling this story. So I would go to the code and make some tweaks and then go back to the text. But the idea was to tell a story, and more than that, to explain it in a way that would be more clear. Because even for me, when I'm trying to learn something new, I would go there and this seems cryptic, or sometimes you see the way that it's presented, it just overlooks a lot of steps as if they were obvious. I mean, they may be obvious to you once you've done this for many years, but it's not obvious to the person that's reading it. They're how the hell did he go from here to there? So I was trying to bridge all these gaps as I would see them coming from other sources, and say, how did they go from this to that? I'm going to go step by step. That's where the step by step from the title comes from, right? Because really some painful process to dissect every single step of the way to show it how it works without assuming much. That was the main idea. I learned a lot myself in the book, because many things I learned before writing, and then I'm going to talk about that. And then all of a sudden, but what's the impact of changing this or changing that? Or how does this has an effect on the result when you train the model? So I investigated lots of scenarios and different parameterizations to see how they will play out. And then I found lots of new stuff even for me during the process of writing, which was very nice. So the writing process was a lot of work, but it was very much enjoyable because it was being creative ultimately.
Yeah, I'm just sorry, I'm just looking up here. What you said that was so great, and that reminded me of an interview I did with an author named Eric Mathis, who's got this book on LeanPub called Beginner's Python Cheat Sheets, and he has, I think, one of the best-selling kind of beginners books on Python in the world. And he said something very similar to you, which is really getting it step by step. Really doing that is such a challenge, and you do learn a lot along the way, but it is something you kind of have to enjoy at the same time, right? If you're not getting any enjoyment out of it, then it's tricky. But it is funny how you you really do have to push yourself to not skip stuff.
Honestly, I mean, I'm curious by nature, so I always like to always to have more. And then a friend of mine was helping me with like reviewing the first draft of the things, and then at some point he was like, "Oh, why don't you talk about optimizers?" I was not planning to talk about optimizers, but when he mentioned, I'm gonna can add optimizers. So there were like another 40 or 50 pages in the book about optimizers alone. I had to actually try to cut some stuff short because it was already 1,000 pages, but it could have been longer, because I really like digging into the details and learning more about it. And that's point, okay, I need to finish this because some people bought the book already and they are waiting to be finished. I need to finish. And this is a difference between being self-published and working with a traditional publishing, right? Publisher, right? Because there you're going to have to fit your work within the parameters that they would expect you to do, right? So then you have to make it shorter. Then you cannot go into so much detail because they don't want to have a 1,000 pages book. They only have up to 500 or so. So I like the freedom that being able to decide myself. I want to go crazy and have 50 more pages on optimizers alone, and that's it, right? I think that's I like that. Right? There is there's a trade-off because on the other hand, I have to control myself and not extend myself too much in the book. But yeah, I think it worked.
You mentioned in there that while you were still working on the book, people had bought the book already and were waiting for it to be finished. So I looked this up before. You published your book in progress. So you published it. The first 2 chapters I think was the first thing that you did when you launched it, and then you published chapters along the way. What was your experience like publishing like that? Did you get lots of people kind of helping you with corrections or suggestions or complaints or demands?
It was, I think, one of the points that doing it partially, it's interesting because, knowing that some people already bought your book and they are expecting to have it finished really helps you get going. Because I didn't want to let anyone down, right? I made a promise to myself and to the people that already bought the book that I would publish 1 chapter a month. So that would be at least, of course, and then I got like 2 or 3 chapters ahead. So if there was any delay, I would have some buffer.
Smart.
And it was hard to keep up until the end with a chapter a month. I got a lot of feedback from my friends. They are all present in the acknowledgements page of my book because they really helped me with reading and pointing me some of the things. And most of the things like, okay, what do you mean by that? Or can you make it more clear? Because even if I was trying to do step by step, sometimes my own bias or by knowing something for long would get in the way, and then I would just jump over something, right? They would bring me like, okay, shake me and like, okay, what is that? Where does this come from? And then this was very helpful. Luckily, I don't remember any complaints. I remember there were a couple of refunds along the way. The one person complained about the layout. I don't like the layout very much because layout is really, really hard to have it right. I spent like 10 months writing the book, and between formatting everything and getting everything right, and then I organized the paperback edition. I was doing that. It was like another 10 months.
Oh, 10 months.
Yeah, because I hired someone to proofread everything because I'm Brazilian, right? I'm not a native speaker. So I tried my best to write it correct English, but some of the expressions or stuff that I used was not sounding so well to a native speaker. So she helped me with that. And then I had to review all that, and formatting, and then sometimes the pictures would not be so great. I have to do it over. So yeah, of course, I did a lot of mistakes at the beginning because it was my first book, right? I shouldn't have started with a 1,000 pages book. I should have started with something smaller to learn first. But yeah, next one, I'm gonna save some time on that.
And actually, in the interest of saving time and helping people out listening who might be planning their first book or working on their first book, what tools did you use to write the book? What, I'm assuming you didn't use Microsoft Word if you were doing a lot of formatting and it was 1,000 pages long. So yeah, can you just let us know the detail of what you used?
Yeah, sure. So mostly I use, actually there were two stages, right? First, I was writing in Markdown. So I used this editor called Typora, which is very nice. I really like, because of the problem with doing Markdown, some of the editors, they have like two windows, right? One you write Markdown, the other you see it. And then it's not nice because, it gets perfect, at least for me, it would get in the flow. In this Typora, you would write a Markdown, it will render it automatically in the same window. So it was felt like, okay, you can do stuff. So I would write all of that. But then when I was already trying to make it the PDF version, I bumped into some problems that I couldn't overcome with that. And then I had to convert everything to Ask to Doc. Then I use this Ask to Doctor. The Ask to Doctor PDF, Ask to Doctor EPUB, so it does mix all these conversions. So I had to make this change to convert some of the chapters for that. And then I was able to get the PDFs in the way that I wanted, all the formatting. The funny thing is that even if I did this after 3 or 4 chapters, I still kept writing the book in Typora because it felt so good to write it, and then I was like already mastering the conversion. So I would just write everything in Typora and then in the end convert Markdown to Ask to Doctor, make some tweaks, and then generate the PDFs for the book. But that was not even the most challenging part. I think that the worst part is to getting all these images correct, because then you have all the resolutions, and I have to change and resize and rescale these like so many times. So that was a lot of work. But yeah, I'm proud of that. I'm really happy with the result.
Oh, it's an amazing book and very well produced. And thank you very much for sharing those details, including the challenges and the ways you have to find your path and develop it yourself. And it's one of the interesting things about self-publishing is that, of course, you're free of the constraints that the publisher might impose on you and stuff like that. You're also, in a sense, free of all the professional help they can give you producing your book. And so you have to learn how to do it yourself or pay someone to do it for you. But even then, you still have to learn how to work with people who are paid to do this kind of thing. So you still have to learn a lot about it because it is hard to make a well-formatted book, particularly one with lots of pictures and things like code samples and things like that. The last question we always save for guests on the podcast, if they're a LeanPub author, is if there was one terribly broken and frustrating thing about LeanPub that we could fix for you, or if there was one magical feature that we could build for you, can you think of anything you would ask us to do?
So I don't think anything is terribly broken. I'm really happy with the overall experience with the LeanPub. The only thing that at the very beginning when I tried to use this integration with GitHub, so I would write the Markdown and it would send to LeanPub itself. When it was rendering the code in the PDFs, sometimes it would not respect the boundaries, with the background, and then it would get a little bit above or a little bit below. So that's one of the reasons that I end up doing the book using Ask to Doctor, because I couldn't solve this. When I was trying to do the code snippets, sometimes they would not be rendered properly. But that was the only problem that I had. But since I had like a whole lot of snippets of code in the book, that was something that I could not handle, right, or get over with. So that's why I made the change. But apart from that, I'm happy. I really like the table of contents thing that you can put the HTML inside and put it there. So no complaints, no worries.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for sharing that. Yeah, no, there are some cases where sometimes the formatting of sort of the output in the LeanPub book isn't exactly what the author wants. And if it's not exactly what you want, some people are like, that's fine. And other people are like, no, like I want it to be exactly like I want it to be. And it all depends on the project and the author and things like that. Thanks very much for sharing that. That's very important feedback for us to hear. And yes, and the HTML feature that you're mentioning. So if you're uploading a book to LeanPub as opposed to using one of our own writing flows, we can't kind of see the table of contents in the file that you've uploaded. And so we can't show it on the book landing page, but we do give you an option to sort of like, if you know a little bit of HTML, you can actually sort of tell LeanPub what to show for the table of contents on the book landing page, which really helps readers kind of discover the book and decide whether they want to buy it, and it's going to give them what they want. Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for taking the time out of your evening to talk to me and talk to our audience. And thank you very much for using LeanPub as the platform for your really amazing book.
It was very nice to talk to you. Really happy to participate. That was my first podcast. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, thanks very much. You did a very good job. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. And as always, thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the Front Matter podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate and review it wherever you found it. And if you'd like to be a LeanPub author yourself, please check out our website at leanpub.com. Thanks.